The Scared Warrior Queen. The space station was always busy. People rushed through long halls. Machines hummed. Ships came and left. But when she walked in, everything stopped. She was tall, taller than most. Her armor was black and old, with deep marks across the chest and shoulders. Her skin was dark gray, rough like stone. Her eyes were sharp, like cold metal. No one knew her real name. They called her the Deathwind. Everyone feared her. Even the bravest alien soldiers stayed away. When she walked, people moved out of her way. They whispered behind her. No one dared speak to her. No one wanted her to look at them, except one man. His name was Ace, a human engineer. Not a soldier, not a fighter. He worked in Bay 4, fixing broken engines and replacing filters. He liked quiet mornings and warm tea. He never cared about rumors. And when he first saw her walk through the bay, he did something no one else had done. He didn't move. She was walking past a row of crates. Everyone stepped aside, bowing their heads. But Jace just stood there, holding a spanner, wiping grease from his hands. He looked up and saw her. Their eyes met. Hers were cold, but his were calm. She stopped. No one had ever made her stop. For a few seconds, everything was silent. The machines, the voices, even the air. She tilted her head slightly. Jace didn't speak. He didn't look scared. He just nodded once. Then, slowly, she walked past him. Everyone stared at Jace like he was crazy. Later, at the repair desk, Jace's friend Milo whispered, "Do you know who that was?" Jace nodded. "Yeah, I heard." "You should stay away from her," Milo warned. "She once ripped a man's arm off in the middle of a bar fight." Jace shrugged. Maybe he deserved it. Milo shook his head. "You really don't get it. She's not just dangerous. She's cursed." Jace said nothing. But that night, he couldn't stop thinking about her eyes. The next day, she came again. This time, Jace was eating a sandwich near the docking gate. He saw her walk in. As usual, everyone stepped back, but Jace kept eating. She looked at him again. Her gaze held for longer this time. He didn't flinch. She kept walking. Days passed. She kept coming. Always quiet. Always alone. But Jace noticed small things. Her hand sometimes shook when no one was looking. Her eyes watched shadows, as if expecting danger. She never turned her back to a room. And she always sat near exits. One morning, Jace found her in the cafeteria. The place was empty. She was sitting at a corner table, eating a small bowl of soup. Alone, as always. Jace grabbed a tray and walked over. "May I sit?" he asked. She looked up. No words, just a stare. He waited. After a long pause, she nodded. They ate in silence. He didn't ask questions. He didn't try to talk. And when he left, he said, "Thank you." The next day, she was there again. Same table, same soup. She looked up when he walked in. This time, she nodded before he asked. They shared more silent meals. One evening, as they sat with their trays, she finally spoke. "Why are you not afraid of me?" Her voice was low, rough, like wind over stone. Jace looked at her, because fear makes people blind. "And I like to see." She blinked slowly. "You don't know what I've done." "Maybe not," Jace said, "but I know what you're doing now. And right now, you're eating soup." She stared at him for a long time. Then, something strange happened. She smiled. Not a big smile, just a small lift at the corner of her mouth, but it was real. The next day, she wasn't at the table. Jace waited, finished his meal. Still, she didn't come. He tried to shake it off, but something felt wrong. Back in his workshop, he found a small metal card on his desk. No name, no words, just a simple mark, an old symbol from her world. It meant Watcher. That night, she stood on the observation deck, looking out into the stars. She was not sure why she watched the human. Maybe it was his calm voice. Maybe it was the way he saw her, not like a weapon, not like a monster, but like someone still alive. And for the first time in many years, her thoughts didn't go back to battle, blood, or pain. Instead, she wondered what soup he would eat tomorrow. The silent meals. Jace never expected her to return. Not after the quiet meals, not after the strange, tense stillness that always followed their time together. But she did. 3 days later, just as the lights dimmed across the station's artificial night cycle, she walked into the cafeteria like a shadow slipping through metal and silence. This time, she didn't scan the room for threats. She didn't check the exits twice. Her eyes went straight to the corner, where Jace sat with his usual tray of lukewarm food. She didn't say a word. She simply pulled the chair back with a low scrape and sat across from him. Jace didn't flinch. He looked up, smiled gently, and took a bite of his rice. No one else dared enter the room while she was there. The staff had learned to avoid her presence, as if her shadow stretched longer than her body, as if it pulled the air thinner wherever she walked. But Jace seemed untouched by it. He just continued to eat, the same as always, relaxed but aware. She watched him, silent. He didn't ask questions, didn't stare, didn't treat her like a puzzle to solve or a ghost to fear. That was what made her stay. The next day, it happened again. And the next. Slowly, a routine formed. Jace would arrive a few minutes early, always sitting at the same table with a simple meal. Sometimes soup, sometimes noodles, once a sad little sandwich that looked like it came from a forgotten vending machine. She would arrive moments later, always quiet, always watching. She never brought food herself. She never ordered. And one day, Jace, without a word, slid half of his tray toward her. She looked at it, looked at him, then back at the tray. She didn't thank him. She didn't refuse. She simply picked up the spoon and began to eat. Jace didn't mind. He liked the quiet. In a station full of noise and tension, where engines hissed and alarms buzzed, and people lied through their teeth to survive, silence was rare. Real silence. Not the kind that came from fear or discomfort, but the kind that felt like peace. That's what he found in those moments with her. Peace. He learned things about her without needing to ask. He saw how she scanned every room out of habit, not fear. How her back was always straight, like she expected an attack from anywhere. How her right hand always hovered near the blade at her side, even when eating soup. He noticed the small, faded symbols on her armor, the kind that marked old soldiers, the kind the galaxy had tried to erase. He never mentioned them. But one day, he nodded at the smallest one near her left shoulder, shaped like a broken star, and said, "I've seen that before. Old rebel fleet, right?" Her eyes narrowed, sharp and unreadable. She nodded once. Jace just smiled and said, "My brother flew for them. Long time ago." She didn't respond, but her eyes softened. Jace didn't mention it again. It was enough. After a week of silent meals, she finally spoke. Her voice was low, almost dry, like someone who hadn't used it in a long time. She asked, "Why are you not afraid of me?" Jace paused, took a slow breath, then said, "Because fear is boring, and I think you're interesting." She tilted her head, confused. "You think being near me is interesting?" Jace nodded. "You don't talk. You don't lie. And you eat soup like it's your last meal. Most people here just complain." She stared at him for a moment, then gave a sound he had never heard from her. A small breath. Not quite a laugh, but close. A flicker of something passed over her face. Maybe it was surprise. Maybe it was sadness. Maybe both. She said, "You don't know what I've done." Jace leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Maybe not, but I've seen what you haven't done. You haven't hurt anyone since you got here. You haven't drawn your blade. You haven't even raised your voice." Her fingers tapped the table, slow and steady. "Not yet." Jace shrugged. "Then I'll enjoy the quiet while it lasts." That night, as he walked back to his quarters, he found something small tucked in his work bag. It was a simple piece of metal, shaped like a teardrop. He recognized it. It was part of a warrior's crest, the kind given only to those who survived 10 battles in a row. It meant strength, loyalty, and pain. The symbol had been scratched through in one clean line, a sign that the bearer no longer claimed honor. Jace held it in his palm for a long time before placing it on his desk. He didn't need to ask where it came from. He knew. Meanwhile, she stood alone on the outer deck, staring at the stars through thick glass. She didn't think about battles that night. She didn't remember the screams, the fire, the betrayal. She thought about Jace's soft voice, about the way he smiled without fear, about how he passed the soup tray like it meant nothing. And for the first time in what felt like years, the cold in her chest didn't feel so heavy. The truth in shadows. The station lights flickered low that night, casting long shadows across the metal floors as Jace made his way through Bay 6. He wasn't supposed to be there. Technicians weren't allowed after hours unless called for emergency repairs, but something felt wrong. Alarms had briefly flashed red earlier, then gone quiet. No one else seemed worried. But Jace had learned something in his years working these forgotten corners of space. When the alarms go silent too fast, it means someone wants them silenced. He followed the faint sound of movement, soft and rhythmic, like footsteps against steel, echoing from the cargo wing near the back of the station. His steps slowed when he heard a low grunt, then a sharp metallic clash. He ducked behind a broken wall panel and peeked through a gap. His breath caught in his throat. She was there, alone, surrounded by 3 figures in dark armor. They were slavers, the kind who hunted refugees and station workers for off-world labor. One of them held a short electric spear. Another had a net gun. But she had nothing but her fists and a knife strapped to her thigh. Her cloak had been torn off. Her hair hung loose and wild. And though her face stayed calm, her eyes burned like fire. The slavers shouted something he didn't understand. One laughed. The tall one reached forward, probably thinking she'd go quietly. But she moved faster than Jace could blink. She twisted his wrist, broke his arm in one sharp snap, and spun into the next with a punch that cracked a visor. The third fired the net gun, but she dropped low and rolled beneath it, dragging the tangled net into her attack. She didn't fight like someone who wanted to win. She fought like someone who had already decided she couldn't afford to lose. Jace stepped out before thinking. "Hey," he shouted, then froze as one of the slavers turned toward him. Stupid. He was unarmed, just holding a small metal wrench. The slaver raised a blaster, but before he could fire, she was there, leaping between them. The shot went wide. She slammed the slaver into the wall, then turned to Jace with a snarl. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was louder than he had ever heard, full of anger and fear. She grabbed him by the collar and pulled him behind a crate. "Are you trying to get yourself killed?" Jace blinked, heart racing. "I heard something. I had to check." She shook her head. "You're a fool." But her hands trembled as she said it. She wasn't angry at him. She was afraid for him. They ducked together as more footsteps echoed down the hall. Back up for the slavers. Jace looked at her, saw the blood dripping from a cut on her cheek. "We can't stay," he said. She gave a small nod and led him through a side panel, crawling through ducts and broken shafts until they reached the lower decks. Once safe, she collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. Jace sat beside her, watching the rise and fall of her chest, the way her eyes darted like a caged animal. "You saved me," he whispered. She didn't respond. Instead, she pulled her blade and checked the edge in silence. Jace leaned back. "Why didn't you tell anyone? About the slavers? About what you really do?" She gave him a sideways glance. "Because no one listens, no one cares. They see a weapon. They don't ask why it was forged." He swallowed. "But I care." She looked at him then, truly looked. "Why?" Jace paused, then said, "Because you didn't have to save me, but you did. And because I think you're more than what they say." Her lips twitched at that. Not quite a smile, but something close. She reached into her belt pouch and pulled out a small crystal chip. "Take this," she said. "It's the data from the slaver's ship. Names, routes, captives. Maybe someone will listen to you." Jace took it carefully, fingers brushing hers. "What about you?" he asked. "They'll come for you." She stood, tall and tired. They always do. When Jace returned to the upper levels, he passed a group of drunk station workers in the mess hall. One of them was talking loudly, slurring his words. "Heard the Deathwind killed 3 men again. Savage beast, that one. Should have been put down years ago." Jace stopped walking, turned around. "You're wrong," he said, loud and clear. The group looked up, surprised. "You weren't there," Jace added. "You don't know her." The drunk laughed. "You defending her now? She's a war criminal." Jace stepped closer. "She's a protector. She's saved more lives than you'll ever count. Maybe instead of telling stories, you should ask yourself why someone like her is still fighting." He walked away before they could answer. Later that night, back in his room, Jace stared at the chip she had given him. It was warm in his hand, like it carried the weight of everything she'd never said aloud. He realized then that she hadn't just saved him from a blaster shot. She trusted him with her truth, and in a galaxy built on lies and fear, that meant more than anything. Her story is not a legend. The station's bar was dim and half empty that night, filled with the quiet hum of broken lights and the low murmur of tired voices. Jace sat alone at the back, nursing a warm drink that barely tasted like anything, his thoughts heavy with the memory of her bloodied face and the data chip now locked in his drawer. The slavers hadn't come back, not yet, but the silence that followed felt worse, like the calm before something terrible. A few seats down, an old alien with wrinkled skin and a cloudy eye began to speak, not to anyone in particular, but loud enough for Jace to hear. "They say the Deathwind once burned a whole ship full of civilians," he said, voice rough with drink. "Say she drowned her own captain in cryofluid," smiled while he screamed. The group around him leaned in, hungry for stories. Jace stayed silent, but his fists clenched. The old alien poured another drink and continued, "But that's not what really happened." That made Jace turn his head. The others scoffed, but the alien raised a finger. "I was there. I was fleet logistics during the Scar Moon War." She was a lieutenant then. Still had a name. She didn't smile much, but when she did, it made people feel safe. The bar quieted a little. The Empire ordered her unit to wipe out a rebel village, said they were hiding weapons. She scanned the place, found nothing but farmers and kids. She refused the order. Her captain insisted, so she shot him. Jace leaned forward now, listening hard. She saved those people, but the Empire didn't care. They sent 3 squads to bring her in. She took them all down. Didn't kill unless she had to. When they finally caught her, they chained her to a mining asteroid for 3 years. Said if she survived, maybe she was worth using again. When she came back, she didn't talk, didn't smile, just fought. The old man's voice dropped to a whisper. They made her into the story, made her into the Deathwind. Because if people knew the truth, they'd have to question the ones giving the orders. One of the younger aliens shook his head. "You expect us to believe she's some kind of hero." The old man looked up. "I don't expect anything, but I remember. And memory's heavier than rumor." Jace didn't sleep that night. Instead, he walked the dark halls of the station, passing silent doors and flickering lights, until he found her on the observation deck again, arms crossed, back turned, staring at the stars like they held a secret only she could read. She didn't look at him when he entered, but she spoke. "You heard something." Jace nodded. "About Scar Moon. About the village." A long silence followed. Then she said, It's true. Jace stepped closer. Why didn't you tell me? She shrugged, her shoulders barely moving. Because it doesn't matter. No one cares why you bleed. They only care that you did. Jace sat on the bench beside the window. I care. Her eyes shifted toward him, sharp and full of pain. Why? Jace looked at her scars, her tired posture, the weight she always carried without complaint. Because the truth matters. And because you matter. For the first time, she turned her whole body toward him. No armor. No sharp edges. Just her, worn down, uncertain, but still standing. I was 19 when they sent me to Scar Moon, she said quietly. I wanted to be a pilot. They said I had the skills. They gave me a badge, a ship, and a mission. They said I would bring peace, but peace doesn't come with fire. She paused, then whispered, I still see their faces. The villagers. The captain. My crew. I tried to protect them. I tried to stop it, but the fire came anyway. Jace reached out, not to comfort her, but just to let her know he was there. She didn't pull away. You did the right thing, he said softly. Even when it hurt, even when it broke you. Her voice trembled. It broke everything. Outside the window, a small shuttle passed through the stars, lights blinking like distant hope. Jace watched it go and asked, Do you regret it? She closed her eyes. No, but I regret surviving. Because surviving means living with the lies they tell in my name. Jace shook his head. You're not a lie. You're the only truth some people have left. She opened her eyes again. Then why does it feel like I'm still chained? He stood. Maybe because you're still carrying all of it alone. Maybe it's time you let someone help. She looked up at him, silent. Then, slowly, she nodded. Just once. Not for him, but for herself. That night, she didn't return to her old room deep in the forgotten wing of the station. She followed Jace back to the living quarters, stayed just down the hall. She didn't say goodnight. He didn't ask. But something between them had shifted, no longer just silent meals and stolen glances. Now there was understanding. Now there was something real. And as the station's lights dimmed into artificial night once more, she finally closed her eyes and rested, not because the past was gone, but because, for once, she didn't have to face it alone. Danger returns. It began with a whisper in the docking bay, a quiet exchange between two smugglers who didn't know Jace was listening. They spoke of a bounty hunter, someone who had arrived 2 hours earlier in a black freighter with no ship ID, asking for repairs that didn't need doing. He wasn't interested in fuel or cargo. He was asking about her, asking questions with a grin too sharp to trust and eyes too cold to miss a lie. The name he used was one Jace hadn't heard before, a name that belonged to a ghost, but he knew exactly who it meant. Deathwind. Jace's heart dropped. The slavers hadn't forgotten. They'd just sent someone worse, someone who didn't fail. He left his tools on the floor and ran through the station, checking every room she might be hiding in, each corner they had once shared during quiet meals or walks in the dim corridors. But she was gone. Her quarters were cold. Her blade was missing. And the small metal crest she once gave him, scratched and marked with the weight of her past, was lying alone on his bunk. It felt like a goodbye. Panic twisted in his stomach as he searched through levels the crew rarely used, calling her name under his breath, knowing full well she might already be in danger, or worse, might be facing that danger alone on purpose. He finally found her deep in the reactor wing, crouched behind a power console, blood on her arm and a scorch mark across her chest plate. She looked up when he arrived, eyes wide for a moment, then hard. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, voice sharp and urgent. Jace dropped beside her, chest heaving. "I came to find you." She shook her head, pressing a cloth to her wound. "You shouldn't be here. This is my fight." But Jace wasn't listening to that. He checked her injury quickly, fingers shaking. "You're hurt. We need to get you out." She pulled back. "He's tracking me. You leave now, And he might not follow. Jace stared at her, stunned. Is that why you disappeared? To draw him away. You thought if you went alone, he'd only come for you. She didn't answer. Didn't have to. Her silence said it all. Jace sat back against the wall beside her, breath catching. You idiot, he said quietly. You think I'd let you face this alone? After everything. She looked at him, truly looked, and in her expression there was a crack, a thin fracture in the wall she always carried between herself and the world. I didn't want you to die because of me, she whispered. Jace smiled, sad and tired. I'd rather die with you than live wondering if you were still breathing. They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the reactor masking the heavy footsteps drawing closer. The bounty hunter's voice echoed from the upper walkway, deep and calm, like someone who had never once failed to catch his prey. You can't hide forever, Deathwind, he called. You should have stayed in the mines, should have died there like the rest. She tensed, fingers curling around her blade. Jace placed a hand on her shoulder. What's the plan? She didn't smile, but she didn't push him away. You stall them. I end it. He opened his mouth to protest, but she added, we do this together. But I finish it. Jace nodded. They moved quickly. Jace climbed up through the maintenance shaft and stood in plain sight at the far end of the walkway, waving a small metal pipe in the air. Hey, bounty boy, he shouted. Wrong way. The hunter turned, startled, gun drawn in an instant. He aimed and fired, but Jace ducked just in time, the blast scorching the wall behind him. Then she struck, from below, leaping out of the shadows, her blade flashing in the reactor light. She didn't fight like someone desperate. She fought like someone done running. The hunter was good, fast, precise, but she was faster. Her movements were a blur, each step sharp and practiced. Sparks flew as their weapons clashed. The floor shook under the force of their fight. Jace watched from behind cover, useless in combat, but ready to act if she needed a distraction. He saw her take a hit to the ribs, fall hard, then rise again with a snarl that sent chills down his spine. This wasn't the quiet woman he ate soup with. This was the warrior the galaxy feared. The hunter underestimated her. One wrong move was all it took. She drove her blade into the joint between his armor plates, twisted, and pulled back before he hit the floor. She stood over him as he gasped for breath. He whispered something cruel and broken. She didn't reply. She just turned and walked away. Jace rushed to her side. She was bleeding badly, limping. He put his arm around her. We have to get you patched up. She leaned into him slightly, too tired to argue. They made their way through the narrow halls, alarms now beginning to sound from the reactor overload. They had to evacuate soon, but none of that mattered. They were alive, and as the crew finally saw her, bruised, bleeding, but still standing beside Jace, they didn't look at her with fear. They looked with something new. Maybe respect. Maybe something like hope. Battle in the void. The station trembled with distant warnings, the soft red lights pulsing like a heartbeat as evacuation alerts echoed through every corridor. But Jace barely heard them over the pounding in his ears. The reactor overload caused by the bounty hunter's blaster had triggered a station-wide emergency, and now the oxygen systems were flickering, and the gravity stabilizers were beginning to fail. Still, all Jace could focus on was her, the warrior he had followed through shadows, who now leaned heavily against him, blood running down her side, her breath shallow and ragged. Her armor was cracked. Her eyes were glazed. Yet she still walked, every step a choice to survive. They moved together through the crumbling maintenance wing, dodging sparks and falling panels, the hum of collapsing systems growing louder behind them. Almost there, Jace muttered, trying to keep her awake. Her hand clutched his shoulder, the pressure weak but steady. Don't stop, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Keep moving. They reached the emergency airlock that led to Bay 2, where the last shuttle was still docked. But standing in front of the hatch was another threat. One of the bounty hunter's allies, a second gun for hire who had stayed behind, waiting like a vulture in the dark. He was massive, half machine, half scar, and the moment he saw them, he lifted a railgun that crackled with charged plasma. Jace froze. He had no weapon, and she could barely stand. The hunter spoke in a low, mocking voice. "You killed my brother," he said, stepping forward. "Now you die beside your pet human." Jace felt her push away from him, standing on her own, blade in hand once more. Her knees shook, but her grip was firm. "Come and try," she said. The two clashed like thunder, the sound of metal on metal filling the narrow bay. She dodged his first swing, rolled under the second, and struck high, only to be thrown back into the wall with a roar. Jace shouted her name and rushed to her side, but she held up a hand. "I'm fine," she growled, though her lip was bleeding. "Get to the shuttle. If I fail, you go." Jace didn't move. "We do this together. I'm not leaving you behind." She looked at him with something close to pain, but also pride. "Then help me end it." Together, they formed a plan in the few precious seconds they had. Jace ran left, drawing the bounty hunter's fire with a metal pipe he picked up. Sparks flew as shots missed him by inches. Meanwhile, she charged again, not with brute strength this time, but with strategy. She used the chaos Jace created, the distractions, the noise, the unexpected. She ducked behind crates, struck from angles the cyborg couldn't cover. Her movements were slower now, but every strike was filled with purpose. She didn't fight like someone trying to win. She fought like someone defending the only thing left that mattered. Finally, Jace found the access panel to the fuel tanks near the wall. He pulled the cover free and crossed two wires, triggering a fire alarm and sending steam hissing into the room. Blinded by the sudden fog, the hunter stumbled. That was all she needed. She leaped forward, grabbed his arm, twisted it backward, and drove her blade into the side of his throat, right where flesh met metal. He collapsed, heavy and broken. As the steam cleared, Jace ran to her. She was on her knees now, breathing hard, blood soaking her side. "We have to go," he said, lifting her carefully. She didn't protest. Together, they limped into the shuttle bay. He hit the emergency launch protocol, and the doors hissed shut just as the corridor behind them collapsed in fire. The shuttle engines roared to life, lifting them into the cold black sky, leaving the station behind. From the window, they watched it shrink into the stars, lights flickering, systems shutting down. It wasn't gone, but it was no longer safe. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't their home anymore. Inside the shuttle, Jace guided her to a small med seat. He patched her side with shaking hands, sealing the wound with what little supplies were left. She winced but didn't cry out. She never cried out. When he was done, he sat beside her, exhausted. "You saved them," he whispered, "even if they never know." She leaned back, eyes closed. "I didn't do it for them," she said softly. "I did it for you." Jace looked at her, heart heavy. "Why me?" She didn't open her eyes. "Because you saw me. Not the death wind, not the scars, just me." Jace reached out, gently took her hand. "You're worth seeing." For a long time, they sat in silence as the shuttle drifted through the void. Two souls caught between stars, between past and future, between pain and healing. And though their wounds were fresh, though their bodies ached and their hearts carried weight no ship could measure, there was peace in that small space, or not from victory, but from survival. From trust. From something more powerful than fear. Something real. Legend reborn. The shuttle drifted in the quiet dark of space for nearly a day before a rescue signal found them. An old mining vessel, slow but sturdy, responding to their emergency beacon. The crew on board didn't ask questions at first. They saw the wounded warrior, the human beside her, and simply brought them aboard, gave them blankets, water, and rest. She didn't speak much. Jace answered what he could. He told them the truth, or as much of it as he thought they'd believe. The woman once called Deathwind had saved the station from slavers and hunters. She had fought off 2 men more machine than flesh, blood for strangers who still feared her name. He expected disbelief, expected them to turn away, like so many others had before. But something strange happened. The miners didn't flinch when they looked at her. They didn't whisper or move aside when she limped through the corridor. They offered food, nodded with respect. And once, only once, a young engineer even thanked her. She didn't know how to respond. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her without fear or anger. And maybe it wasn't trust yet, but it was something new, something better. When they finally reached a nearby port station, the news had already traveled ahead of them. The slaver network was disrupted. The bounty hunter's ship was found floating in orbit, disabled. The stolen names from the data chip Jace had shared were confirmed. Over 40 missing people were rescued across 3 systems. The council of the station they left behind sent a message, not to her, but to Jace, requesting details, offering thanks. They had seen the footage. Some brave soul had shared the recordings of her fight in the reactor wing. The station that once feared her had now started to question the story they'd believed. Slowly, her image began to change. Not erased, not cleaned, because the scars remained. The past still mattered. But the fear began to fade. She still walked like a soldier, still watched every door and shadow. But she no longer avoided others. She stood beside Jace when he gave his report. She answered questions when asked. And one day, she even smiled when a child handed her a drawing. 2 stick figures, one tall with a sword, one shorter with messy hair, both standing in front of a spaceship with hearts around them. "Is that us?" Jace asked, grinning. She looked at the drawing for a long time, then nodded. "I think so." Jace stayed close to her, always. He never tried to change her, never asked her to be something softer. But he reminded her, every day, that she didn't have to carry the past alone. They found work on a new station, not as guards or weapons, but as advisors. Jace returned to engineering. She taught combat defense to new cadets. She didn't speak of her past unless asked, and even then, her answers were short. But the cadets listened, not because of what she said, but because of how she stood, how she moved, how she never boasted, only taught. One evening after a long day of training, Jace and she sat on the edge of the station's outer ring, watching the stars spin slowly in silence. "Do you miss who you were?" Jace asked gently. She thought for a while before replying. "I miss who I was before they gave me that name." He nodded. "Then maybe now is your chance to be someone new." She glanced at him, a small flicker of amusement in her eyes. "Like who?" He smiled. "Someone real. Someone free." She looked back at the stars. "I don't know how to be that." Jace leaned closer. "Then we figure it out together." Months passed. The name Deathwind faded from headlines, then from whispers, then from memory. What remained was her presence, her actions, her steady, quiet strength. She never denied what she had done. But now she was no longer feared. She was respected. And for the first time in years, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. She was building something, however slow, however fragile. One morning, as she walked through the training yard, a young girl with wide eyes and messy hair tugged at her cloak. "Are you really the Deathwind?" the girl asked. The question froze her for a moment. She looked down, eyes meeting the child's. And then she knelt, reaching out to touch the girl's shoulder. "No," she said softly, "not anymore." The girl smiled and ran off, satisfied. Jace, watching from nearby, smiled too. She stood, watching the girl vanish into the crowd, and something inside her shifted. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something smaller, but stronger. It was choice. The choice to keep walking forward. And as she turned toward Jace, who was waiting for her with that same look in his eyes, the one that had never changed since the first moment they met, She realized something even deeper. She was not a legend, not a ghost, not a weapon. She was human in the ways that mattered most. Broken, healing, and still choosing love over fear.